Without much more ado, I would like to start the debates for tonight and ask Dambisa Moyo to get to the speaking corner here and deliver her lecture about aid. Is aid responsible for Africa's poverty? Ms. Moyo, you have the floor.
I thought you were supposed to respond. Nobody says Vooruit back. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I was just reminded when we were waiting to come out that the sun is shining, it's wonderful weather outside, and it's Friday night. And so the fact that you're all here to listen about what we have to talk about in terms of development in Africa specifically, to me suggests that you are as compassionate and as concerned about the African continent as I am. And I thank you for being here. What I thought I would do this evening is to share with you some of the benefits that I've had from the book tour. If you had met me about 9 months ago, I would have just gone directly into my main arguments as to why I believe aid is hampering economic development across Africa. However, I learned a lot being on the book tour, and I wanted to start off by sharing with you a couple of points before I launch into the main key points. The first thing I want to start off with is to tell you that I believe that we're all on the same side. We all want the same thing, which I believe is to see Africa achieve long-term economic growth and to actually see a meaningful reduction in poverty across the continent. In particular, I believe that there are 3 things that we agree on. And I believe that the following 3 things, and if anybody objects, you're welcome to put your hand up and stop me, but on the first point, I believe that we all agree in this room that Africa should not be on aid forever. It's not desirable, nor is it reasonable for the African continent to forever be dependent on aid. As I said, if anybody thinks Africa should be on aid forever, you can put your hand up and tell me that I'm wrong. The second point I believe that we all agree on is that we need African governments to take the lead on the issue of development in Africa. It is not good enough for Western society or the international community to care more, or ostensibly care more, about Africa than the African governments themselves. Nor does it matter if Western citizens, or even African citizens, care a lot about economic development if our governments are not taking the lead on economic development. So we need to make sure that African governments are at the forefront of the charge for economic development and the reduction of poverty across the continent. The third thing I believe that we agree on, and this, by the way, I should tell you, it's actually, this is the point of that I've stolen from the Minister of International Development from Norway. And some of you might be aware that Norway gives about 1%, more than 1% of its income. So it's already passed the Monterey commitments of 0.7 of its GDP. It's now giving 1% of its income to aid. So I was very surprised to hear this comment come from the Minister of International Development, Minister Sondheim, in Oslo when I visited. But the third point is that aid has contributed to the dysfunctionality of African governments. Not all governments, but by and large across the continent, it has certainly contributed to dysfunctionality. And I'll talk more about this dysfunctionality, but think of it on a spectrum. On the one side, you have just blatant corruption, so it's contributing to corruption, which we'll talk about. But on the other side, it is allowing African governments, even good African governments, to abdicate their responsibilities. So very much like the way you live in Belgium, or Americans in America, or British people in Britain, or Europeans across Europe, and in many places around the world, the government is responsible for giving public goods, education, healthcare, infrastructure, and security, for example. Across much of Africa, these 4 public goods are provided by the international community, which is completely ridiculous. And I'll come back to this point because ultimately this is a problem, especially when it comes for us as Africans holding our governments accountable. But just as I said, to keep it to the point, these are the three things that I believe that we all agree on in terms of the development question. We don't want Africa to be on aid forever. We need African governments to be motivated, and we have to face up to the fact that aid has contributed to dysfunctionality. Let me just take a quick moment now to explain to you what I mean by aid. There are essentially three types of aid, and I talk about this in the book. The first type of aid is humanitarian or emergency aid. This is the type of aid that we as a global community would give for societies that have, for example, a tsunami or earthquake or floods. I believe that there is a moral imperative for all of us to act when that kind of tragedy happens, wherever it may be in the world. It could be Katrina in the United States, it could be Mozambican floods, it could be the tsunami in Asia. So my book is not about that type of aid. A second type of aid is what I would call charitable or NGO types of aid. NGO types of aid, and in many places in my own country, there are over 25,000 NGOs doing different things in healthcare and education and so on. And let us remember that the types of monies that these NGOs are providing is relatively small amounts. Think about perhaps somebody sending 10 euros to help build a well in Congo DRC, or sending 20 euros to help towards a scholarship for a girl in Zambia, which is where I'm from. These type of interventions, although they are laudable in terms of our own moral convictions, they will not ever be able to create a society where in the long term Africans have jobs and that we actually see a meaningful dent in poverty. And very often it's very narrow interventions that cannot and that will not be able to generate the types of growth rates that we need to see across the continent to actually move people out of poverty. Again, my book is not about NGO or charitable types of aid. I will also say that these two types of aid, so humanitarian aid and NGO aid, have a lot of problems, and many people have written about that. But I think the key point here is it's important for us as a global society to understand what these type of aid can and cannot do. So yes, you can send a girl to school in Zambia, but do not delude yourselves. It is not fundamentally changing the system so that we can overhaul the economic systems in these countries so that we can reduce poverty and create the growth and the jobs that we need. Let me very quickly go through my main reasons for criticizing aid. I'm not going to tell you all of them because otherwise you won't buy my book, so I'm going to keep it very short. Let's start off with the most obvious reason, which is corruption. There's a lot of evidence. It's not Dambisa Moyo's evidence. It's evidence from the international community, World Bank, other development agencies, that aid has contributed and continues to contribute to the degree of corruption that we see across much of Africa. Unfortunately, it's